Welcome to another episode of the EMS Wizard podcast.
Mark.
What is it, Walter?
I'm sick of John always rudely interrupting you, so I'm going to be the one to do it tonight.
I appreciate it. I think
You're welcome. So I'm
maybe
back. I'm back. You know, I missed the last one. I think I'm back.
we are glad to have you back, Walter. We are
Thanks,
glad to
thanks,
have you
thanks.
back.
We wouldn't necessarily say we missed you, but
Not everybody's happy.
That
but,
is
I mean,
that is
I
jacked
guess
up. That's jacked up, I guess.
Be here if you want to.
So I don't know what y'all got on your agenda tonight, but I think we need to take it back a little bit.
Emailed you the agenda, went line by line what we were going to go over. What do you mean you don't know?
Walter only reads books. He doesn't read emails.
If it has pictures.
Yes.
If it has pictures. If it has. So anyway, let's take it old school and go back to when we first started EMS, and then some of the things that changed from what we thought it may have been when we got on that first ambulance. So, I started EMS unofficially as a kid. My granddad was started. He wasn't. He didn't start. He was one of the first members after the founding members for EMS, and he always had his little drawer of hats, and remember old school hats and white uniforms. Terry's over there laughing. Looked like
the good humor
like ice cream truck. Like an ice cream truck. But anyway, he had his hat, he had his badge. I got to play for all that as a kid. And then, I actually decided to follow in his footsteps, went to an EMT class in a rural part of North Carolina. And, all of the hats and the white pants and the white shirt.
Like an orderly?
Like an orderly. Wasn't what it was. So, he actually worked at a paid system and worked paid daytime. So he started as a volunteer and went to be a paid system. And I actually started out as a volunteer. A volunteer where some of our people, listening to us probably don't even realize that there was not a crew that stayed at a station. You responded to the call from your residents sometimes, and even before that, it was all via telephone, and they had what's called a ring down number. Terry, you remember a ring down number? John, you remember a ring down number? You're over there in the western part of the state, so ring down numbers.
No.
You dial one number and everybody's house number rang, and that's how you got some of those calls. Some of the fire departments still had that when I got into EMS.
It was the fire department that I was familiar doing that in.
What?
Yeah, it was a ring down number. So you had one number that you could call, and it would ring to everybody's residence. And you say, "Hey, there's a EMS call, whatever. Who's available, and can they come? And or it's a fire. Can you come to the fire call?"
Did you have to feed the horses before you went on these calls, or how did that?
Terry, I'm not that old.
Did you have indoor plumbing then?
You should know that. John's older than both of us.
And
but Mark is sitting there wondering, how did you get all the cell phones to ring at the same time?
Two lanterns.
Mark, there was 0 cell phones.
2 lanterns if it was a fire, 1 if it was an EMS call.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was a Mark. I know, Mark, you're the baby. But, different. And, he worked for a little bit of I would say a larger EMS system. They had 3 paid crews during the daytime. And then, on the weekends where I worked we didn't have a paid crew. It was volunteer, and you may have had somebody there with you. You may have not had somebody there with you. So, I started actually as a junior member, so I got to go on calls. I think some of y'all said you had that as well. So as something just fell. But as a junior member, I was able to go on calls. Couldn't function as a lead technician or even a driver because I was a junior member under 18 years of age, but I could go out on the calls and, take my personal vehicle to a call to go meet the ambulance that was there to help lift and help do whatever. Because again, it was a volunteer, they had a little bit of paid coverage during the daytime, but mostly it was a volunteer other than Monday through Friday, from 6 to 6 or something was paid. So, it was unique being a little farm boy coming out into the real world of going into other people's residences and going on calls and going behind the scenes in restaurants and wherever else. And I still to this day people say, "Oh my God, that kitchen was nasty." I don't know that I've ever been in a kitchen as an EMS provider that was not nasty. And I'm not saying that it wasn't clean to be able to eat, but the floor was always slick and things like that. So this little country boy coming out into the real world of being an EMT at 18. So I actually turned 18 and 2 months later got my EMT. Difference of the world. How about it, baby Mark?
So yeah, I started in the volunteer fire, the volunteer rescue side of things.
They didn't have a ring down, dude, did they?
Yeah, don't ring down. Don't know how. I don't even know what that means.
I don't know if it was called a ring down. John, what was it called? Was it a ring down or a
Phone tree. I don't.
It was a
I don't remember what.
Hello, operator. Give me extension 382. Thank you. Thank you, operator.
It was a party line. It was a party line. It was called a party line.
Completely different organization, Walter.
Correct.
I think that's a different thing.
Correct.
That was
You
an
have to fight
EMS.
for your right of it, but I don't.
I think party line for the farm boy might be a little different than the party line for the trailer park boy.
Walter, get off the phone.
All right, Mark. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
I'm a little intrigued now exactly what your party line was like now, Walter.
Yeah.
I'm gonna find out what it is.
You're gonna need to.
So y'all didn't have like VHF radios and paging systems and stuff like that. Like it was all.
So we had
Telephone.
so when I actually got in, we had a VHF radio, but prior to that,
One.
So prior to me getting in, the calls were answered at a drive-in during the daytime. So there was a local drive-in that the guy was there all day. So the phone would ring at two different places, and it was Larry's Drive-In is actually what it was. And was it Larry's Drive-In? It wasn't Larry's Drive-In. It was something else before Larry's Drive-In. But when you call there was no 911
Is this
initially.
real?
This is
Are
real.
you making this up?
What
No,
in the
this
name
is
of
real.
a Kid Rock music video are you talking about?
This is real.
What?
So there was a 7-digit telephone number that you could dial, and it would dial at two places. It would dial at the drive-in or ring at the drive-in and ring at the station. If there was somebody at the station, they would answer. Hey, I remember going to go buy cars with my grandfather to the Ford dealership, and two EMTs were at the Ford dealership, and they went on Tuesdays, picked the ambulance up, drove it to the Ford dealership. If they got a call, they left. When they came back, That was Winslow Ford in Windfall. You think I'm crazy? These things were real in rural North Carolina.
This must have been a northeastern North Carolina thing.
They were other places too.
Oh.
So it rang at two places. And yes, when I got in, we didn't have pagers.
Please comment on tonight's episode about whether you believe Walter is making this up or not. So
Hashtag lies are told.
Yeah.
Hey.
Hashtag free Walter.
Yes, Mark, we did have UHF radios. No pagers, UHF radios. Sorry.
I can remember, people talking about on the front of the fire station, there's the pull box. And if there's an emergency, you would go up there and pull the pull box. And that's what, I guess, rang the telephones or whatever. Maybe that was kind of the same system, just maybe in a different.
Probably. I don't know what it was called, but it rang everybody's number at the same time.
Right. So, talking about the, first impact, I guess, that was, made it into our career. Mine was actually before I got into EMS. I was on the fire department, and I couldn't have been 19, 20 years old, somewhere around there. And the fire department was dispatched to a lift assist call. And so I was like, well, I'm just on my way to the store. I'm already on the road. I might as well just stop and help. Yeah, I'm in shorts and flip flops. Probably the most not the most ideal thing to respond to a lift assist in, but I'm right here. Might as well go help. I just want to help. So I get on scene and I go walk in, and I see that they're actually doing chest compression. So this is lift assist turned into a cardiac arrest. So I go in there and I start helping them, work the code or whatever. And I'm like, what is that? Did I step in dog poop in the yard or something? Like, what is this? And they're like, no, Mark, that's not dog.
Oh,
Like, what do you mean? And I looked and I saw it was all over my flip flop and my foot. And I was just first experience to the gross things of EMS was, the poop exposure of
and it doesn't go away.
That's what I will call it. It never, it's one of those things that just kind of stick with you for a while, So yeah, that was my first one of my first, I guess, EMS calls I ran with the fire department before I got into EMS was this lift assist call and exposed to poo. It's the influence EMS had on me before I even started. Poo. Terry, did you have a poo story?
Not like that. I don't even.
We'd have got you all. We'd have got you all discombobulated tonight.
I'm just here like
speechless. I don't even know what to think.
Where did Walter grow up? Did he grow up in some holler somewhere, and where, they didn't have electricity up there at the big house?
I want people.
Or that's the only house that had it was the big house. But
I want people to go back and go say, I know that's right, Walter. That was correct. I want that. I want to hear that. I want to hear that because y'all think I'm crazy, but I'm telling you,
all those people are dead.
They probably are. They probably are because you're talking about in these people were in the 60s when some of this stuff started. And if I could get some of those people to come around to be able to tell you some of those stories, I could give you some of Granddad's stories, not appropriate for this podcast, but I could give you some of his stories that he could tell you that were hilarious. When we think about it now, we're like, really?
I would imagine the guy who was down the road who used to cut my hair, the old barber, would just have some of the craziest stories. And until he fell about 2 years ago, he was still cutting hair, and he was in his 80s. And just hearing some of the good old day stories, but hearing it from him in his 80s versus hearing it from you, Walter, who's like 12 minutes older than I am, is a bit. Walter, it's my turn to talk. Please be quiet. I think for me, one of the things.
Jacked up.
I don't care.
I'm gonna
go in a slightly. It was just surprising to me. I think we all grow up in our bubbles, and Walter, maybe not as much with you, where your family had the farm, where your family was in EMS and doing that stuff. That was one of the big surprises for me in EMS, was just different cultures or different things. I knew religion. I knew that there were different religions, and some people had some different viewpoints on some stuff. But for me, when I go back to those good old days, or getting started into this, was just surprising, going into people's houses, and maybe their house wasn't clean, or just the different cultures, the different views, the different things that people had, or what they thought was important or wasn't important. But I think, unlike Walter, that was the family business. I'd grown up and my mom had been sick. My mom passed when I was young, and I don't know, just guilt trip you. Maybe I got into it. I wanted to help people, so it was a little bit different experience, because I think even though Walter and I are closest in age, I think Mark and I may have had some of the more similar experiences, and where pagers, there was none of this ring down mess. pagers. We had portable radios. We had some different stuff, and I came into it from the fire department. Where Walter, you came into it from.
Where was that at the fire department? Here locally or
Yeah, it was one
okay.
of the local volunteer fire departments, and I joined the fire department because I was new to the area, just looking for something to do. And a buddy of mine in the neighborhood was like, "I volunteered down at the fire department. It's a good group of folks down there. You should come help out." And I said, "Man, I've benefited when my mom was sick, people helping, and maybe I can help somebody." John, how about you in Western North Carolina? What,
I'm only Western to you guys. I'm actually not Western North Carolina.
You're
I'm
central.
to
I'm
us, you
Central.
are.
You're west of 95, close enough.
I am west of 95.
That's funny because the rest of us are east
I
of
came up
95.
Central North Carolina. Yeah. But since Walter called an audible in this episode, I'm having to pull from my. And I think what you're asking is like what type of experience you had from where you got in before. Is that what we're talking about
Yeah,
here?
that's
Yeah,
it.
I mean, like for me, it was like pulling back the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz. Hey, this is what is going out there in the world, and these are some of the things out there in the world.
Yeah.
Just for me.
So I guess to look back on what I came through, and I want to make this relatable, at least to folks, because I think now the world is a little bit more diverse as to what EMS is getting in versus there was a certain set of, I think, people that dumped into EMS from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It sort of just, you were with the fire service or something, and then, there was just a specific brand of person that wanted to be involved with that type of thing. And now we're more diverse. So I wonder and talk about a lot in our officer classes about what does one go through in their transition. And I do that from a personal experience of where you were when you were doing what you were doing, impacts people that had on you to make you the person that you are. And I'm a trailer park guy. I grew up in a trailer park. The ones that you hear about when they talk about the trailer park trash, that's me, man. I grew up in a trailer, had a fence in the backyard. I didn't have a lot of exposure to some things. So if you're talking about what was something that was I was exposed to, I didn't have any exposure to drugs at all. I'm talking about the illegal stuff, weed.
What?
Nope. No, never had
in a trailer park.
in the trailer park. Absolutely. No. It was BB guns and bicycles and walking through woods, and some people that I know might have broken into a warehouse, and maybe exploring that area. But I cannot confirm or deny that. But that was the mischief of Rockingham County when I was growing up. And so, but drugs was definitely not on the list of things that the group did. And so, whereas I was around people when I got into EMS that had at least seen it, smelled it, maybe even tried it, I never had. And to this day, I never have. Now, I obviously know what it smells like and stuff, but that was my biggest shock point, is to come home feeling unprepared to mom or daddy saying, I don't know what that stuff is. And it was very hard for someone like me coming up to think that there was something outside the world than just where I grew up. I grew up, I say country. I did not grow up country. I did not ride four-wheelers. I did not go fishing and hunting. That's not my kind of country. My kind of country was I did not go to the mall. I did not go and go to the city and do stuff. My kind of country was I was a homebody. I stayed there in my, mom and dad kept me close to the, to the house. I had a brother, I had a sister. We stayed close to the house. Our friends were in walking distance. And so we had a group of people like that. So it was rapid culture shock for a guy like me to enter into a realm of, just simply, and I think Walter alluded to some of this. I think now looking at walking into someone else's house and smelling the smells, seeing the things that they have, how they live, which may be religious, it may be just cultural, it could be racial. There's a lot of different things that I was, exposed to that just simply wasn't covered in the books.
and that's I think for me this is the difference and the similarity all at one time, because hearing that where I grew up just outside of DC, for y'all, just like you say, Terry, I'm from Central North Carolina. You know, I'm not from the West, but where I grew up in Maryland, people would say, "Hey, it's the North where you're from." But I would go to the mall. You know, before my mom got sick, it was a very middle class private school. Even after my mom got sick and passed, and we didn't have the money anymore because of those medical bills and that stuff. I mean, I would go to the mall and but at so that's where some of that upbringing is very different for me, but for me that still resonates to say those different things for those people. And to where I mean, I guess in high school I would have been exposed to drugs with where I went to school back home with people using drugs, but just the world in general, and the sickness, the illness, the disease. And here's a word that I sometimes use in teaching. Mark and I were doing a class a couple weeks ago, and I used this word, suffering. That would and that's a very kind of grabs your attention word. We don't use it in society, but that suffering that people are having for whatever the reason. Mark?
So yeah, I mean, the thing I hear you guys talking about a lot is the environmental change. You know, kind of going into some of these residences, getting immersed into some of these calls and some of these scenarios. You know, one of the things that was probably the most drastic change for me wasn't as much as the environment and the things going on in the environment, but people in general. You know, kind of like Walter, like we were talking about earlier. You know, fresh out of high school, straight into EMS, straight into the fire service, right? So we're still learning how to be adults and how to communicate and how to how to talk with people, how to kind of build rapport with people. And for a 19-year-old to learn how to build rapport with someone, that takes a lot of practice, and it takes a really good mentor and some good trainers to kind of help you through that. So that was probably the biggest experience I had in EMS early on, was just getting to figure out how to get to know people, how to communicate with different people from different cultural backgrounds, and what different things mean for different people. That was probably the biggest learning curve for me early on, that I feel like that there's no class, there's no training, there's nothing that that can prepare anyone for that, right? That's just something that we got to kind of go out and do.
But Mark, I think then we didn't have, and you're younger than we are, but you still
way younger.
Well,
way,
but in high school, did you do a lot of texting?
Yeah, on my BlackBerry.
On your BlackBerry. So
What?
you think about
Yeah.
A
Are you
curve.
serious?
Yeah, well, actually, before the BlackBerry, it was the little Nokia phone that had a little screen with a little worm game that you would play on the
you had
phone.
to press 1 3 times to get C.
Or two. It was actually two. You had to press three times to get C, right? And then three. That was the first phone. After I busted it, I had a BlackBerry.
But I think that was, we had to talk to people, and I think we were able to talk to people. We had mentors, but contrary to y'all's belief, the agency I was working with was coming up with radios and getting more radios, and they were like bricks. But just going back to the old school, listening to the way they did old school things, I think we had to communicate. And I think now and I'm not a big generation person to be pointing fingers at generation, but I think as leaders, especially today, it's very hard for old school leaders to be able to communicate with young school people because they went through COVID. They have text messaging. They have, they would prefer that you text them instead of call them or talk to them on the telephone. So, whereas when we all got in at a young age, we didn't have texting and we didn't have, my first cell phone, I think I was probably 20 when I got my first cell phone, and it was in a bag about this big and it stayed in the car. You didn't take it with you. It had a big chargeable battery, and you surely didn't text on it. But
I had that same phone. I had that same bag phone.
Correct. That
Yes.
Nokia,
United States Cellular.
It was US
Cellular. It was
Yeah,
like
it
a
was.
Nokia bag phone or Motorola bag phone.
Yeah, my dad had one.
I think that's a communications challenge that we go through now is, because people don't talk to each other like we are sitting here talking to us. I mean, they would prefer sometimes to text back and forth. Go ahead.
They're communicating. They're just communicating differently. And if we were to take that to, from the music that John Wilson is the oldest in the group listened to growing up, to the music that his son Mark Casey listened to growing up, I think that Mark probably listened to different music, and what would the previous generation say about that? That music is garbage. That music is, and now when you're listening to the radio, Guns N' Roses is on classic rock. So I think there's an evolution to some of those things.
Now, what blew my mind was the first time I heard the Foo Fighters on the classic rock channel.
You know who's not on classic rock? Nickelback. John?
You know why? Because they only play bands that are good
they're awesome
on the classic rock channel. So I think one thing I would do to bring all this back in, otherwise it's just people hearing us talk about some stuff, is the responsibility. Now we have to own this. And when I'm saying we, I'm talking about the EMS industry, the folk, if you're listening to this is your responsibility. You have to help people connect. As they're getting into EMS, understand they're going to be exposed to things they never have, or they have been exposed to things you haven't. And that's not going to be covered in a book somewhere. And our responsibility to each other is going to be to try to help folks come in and deal with that exposure, deal with those different things instead of learning a hard way like maybe the four of us had to go through. And many of you out there have had to go through to get, to whatever homeostatic in EMS was.
There was a thing that I was listening to on a podcast, and it was a military veteran, and he was talking about when he got out of the military, some of his advice was taking advantage of opportunities, that when that opportunity knocks on the door, you need to answer the door. And the more you take advantage of those opportunities, the more opportunities are going to come your way. It's that contagious, it's addictive. So when that door opens, and so that's one of the things that I would probably say is, what is that opportunity, whether it's a class, is it a type of call, pushing outside of that comfort zone, because that's the only way that you grow, is when you get pushed outside of that comfort zone, and do something different.
This week we're going to be at Blue Ridge Community College talking about the next EMS Leadership Academy coming up. And I know from the last academy that we did, that talking about these things was really significant to that group, to be able to have that networking piece, because they're sharing those experiences. So I'll actually look forward here in a few days being out there to have these same type of conversations, because I feel like that's where our greatest impact was. Walter's grandfather didn't have that. And actually, the four of us really didn't have that either. And there's lots of folks that don't have that. And so that's one of the things I'd say, that if it wasn't for the exposure of the things that we've all had, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today talking about the things that we are to make things better. Would you not agree with that, Walter?
Yeah, no, I would say, everybody that's listening to this podcast has something to offer a leadership role, even if it is the brand new EMT that's coming out learning something to be able to help that other brand new EMT coming out. Each of us have an opportunity to be able to learn from each other, and we just have to be able to take that ability and opportunity to be able to do so. Because my grandfather started in the mid to late 60s. Things changed a lot between that day and when he retired, and a lot has changed in that almost 60 years now, a little over 60 years now. A lot has changed with EMS than what he called EMS, ambulance service or rescue squads. So
first aid squads, or yeah.
So correct. So
before we end, Mark, got a question for you.
Yeah, man.
Mark, do you have a best friend?
I have a few best friends, but there is no rank and file for my best friends. They're just best.
So you're trying to say John Wilson is the only one that has one best friend?
The only reason we rank our best friends is because of MySpace. Mark didn't have a MySpace, but I bet all of us did, and that's where we've got
Actually,
it.
I did not. I did not have a MySpace. Never did.
What?
Because
Walter didn't have the internet. They didn't have phones.
That's a different story for a different day.
Walter would answer the phone. Hoi hoi.
I was calling you around Maryland, Terry, so you could help me out and push some internet back to me.
Yeah.
Why did you want to know the answer to that, Terry?
I've been thinking about it.
Who was your best friend in high school, Mark?
My best friend in high school, I had like probably 3 or 4 best friends in high school.
Are they still your best friends today?
2 or 3 of them are.
Okay, cool. Terry, did you have a best friend? Do you have a best friend from high school that's still your best friend today?
No, there's probably 2 or 3 guys that I hung out with and did a whole bunch of stuff with back home. But as we've moved, I keep in contact with some of those people with the Facebook, but I didn't really have a best friend when I moved down here. Yeah.
And Walter, did you have best friend from high school that's still your best friend today?
It's bait. Don't take it.
It's bait.
I can't say that I do because all of them are not here anymore. So I can't say that. I still keep up with, with some of them, as Terry said, with Facebook, but no, I can't say that I do still.
Wow.
Only you, John.
But the worst thing is you're not that person's best friend.
I believe that if you was to ask that person, they would tell you wholeheartedly that,
I don't know,
that person is smarter than the rest of us because they can strategically use that.
Hey, big man, who
strategically use that?
Big man, who's you?
So, this episode went to shit.